Hey everybody, welcome back to what is going to be Bleeding Cool's last recap of Twin Peaks: The Return. We're going to be taking a look at recapping parts 17 and 18. So we're going to be doing a little bit of double duty, so this might go a little longer. While this will be the last recap, I can tell you this won't be the last post on Twin Peaks because there's a whole bunch of themes I'm going to be talking about when I go through this that I'm going to want to extend a lot further because I'm still not quite sure where I stand on things. I'll go into the reason as we move along. The one thing I will say, though, is I do think from this point forward I'm going to be approaching Twin Peaks from two different perspectives. Perspective of a David Lynch fan and perspective of a Twin Peaks fan. Because I think after this season especially, they are two distinctly different things. But again, I'll touch upon that a little bit and as we move along. But I'm going to go to my handy-dandy lists to make sure that we start recapping properly. So with part 17, we see Cole lamenting the fact that he wasn't able to shoot Diane, that he just couldn't bring himself to do it. And we also learn at this point, Cole relates to Albert something he hasn't told him for the last 25 years, and that was that Major Briggs had spoken to Cole and to Cooper about this evil entity known as Jude. I think that was the pronunciation properly, but it's how it essentially became Judy when we hear it referenced by Philip Jeffries. We are under the assumption, and if we're going to interpret everything properly, Jude, this evil entity, essentially gave birth to Bob and a lot of the things that we are seeing in play. For lack of a better phrase, an ultimate evil. What's interesting is that we get the point now where all the forces are starting to make their way to Twin Peaks. We see even now, Cole, Albert, everybody knows what's going on. They know that they need to be going to the sheriff's station, which, unfortunately, somebody has already gotten there first. But I'm going to backtrack a little bit on that. What we learn is that Doppelkoop finds his way into one of the vortexes. We find him in a location that previously that Bobby, Hawk, Frank, and Andy were at. And the vortex, we see Doppelkoop being viewed by the firemen. And next thing we know, we find him outside the Twin Peaks fire station. And things just, I don't know about the rest of you, but I know, just a feeling of dread that went over me, especially with Andy. Because again, with Doppelkoop willing to just kind of pull out a gun and kill in a second, I wasn't sure where this was going. Thankfully, this got strung along a little bit. It was interesting to see what the the two destinies were for Freddy, One Punch Man, for lack of a better phrase. We see early on that when Chad is able to get out of the jail with a fake key he had, again, makes me wonder why he waited that long, but go to that. We see he gets a hold of a gun and gets the drop on Andy, but Freddy kind of takes care of that. Again, I'm not sure if Chad's going to be eating solid food anytime soon. Freddy's other part of his destiny we're going to be talking about in a minute. But we see what was very interesting is that there's this tense moment between Frank and Doppelkoop. Especially they do the old. I still love it because it still freaks me out. But you see this in a lot of noir thrillers or in horror movies where he's talking to somebody, he thinks of somebody, and then that actual person calls him on the phone. So there was that extra tension that was there too. The idea of Lucy getting the drop on Doppelkoop and quote unquote killing him, I don't know what I felt about that. Gotta be honest. First off, seeing her do it and everything, I had flashbacks to Die Hard at the end, if you know what I mean. But I don't know. The idea of Bob being pulled out from Doppelkoop. Again, I'm gonna need to give a little more thought on this one because just the way it was kind of portrayed as this big flying boulder that just kept kicking the crap out of Freddy until Freddy eventually, again, one punched it a couple times, which I know wouldn't technically make it one punch, but one punches it out of existence. Yeah. The effects kind of hurt a little bit. Again, in the weekend of Stephen King's It, let me just say, in an homage to what I thought was the horrible effects at the ending of that original miniseries on ABC, that kind of reminded me of a little bit. I was expecting a little better. But, so yeah, this idea that, yeah, the Bob flying around, not a big fan. Doppelkoop, however, gets his ring from Cooper. We see him fade away to the Black Lodge. We will see him later on. But it seems like we now have the beginnings of some type of ending, and then, of course, it's David Lynch. So, of course, the rug gets pulled out from all of us, and I'll title this section because of where it goes. The past dictates the future. And the quote is, um, we live inside a dream. I hope I see every one of you again. Um, there's just this weird moment where we see Cooper's image imprinted on the screen, and we know things have just gone a little haywire. Um, he ends up leaving with Cole and with Diane, and they end up walking into, it, for lack of better, I mean, it's to a side room where he uses the Great Northern Key to start making the journey that Doppelkoop made, which was to go see Philip Jeffries. And he says to Cole and Diane before he leaves, "See you at the curtain call," which reminded me a lot of Lost, by the way. On a side note, I don't know why. Maybe that will mean more when I think about this and process it. But I had a little bit of a reminder of the ending to Lost with that one. Um, but we see that when he's talking to Jeffries, we see the symbols, a number of the symbols that were on the alcove wall. The infinity symbol, I think, is a little bit of a heads up as to where this might be going. And we see Cooper reference February 23rd, 1989. And now, all of a sudden, we find Cooper back in time to the scene where Diane, wow, where Laura and James are having their interaction on the night when Laura would be killed. And we see in the film Our Fire Walk With Me, where Laura sees somebody pass James and freaks out and goes crazy. We see now in this series who that was actually Cooper, which I thought was a very interesting tie into the movie. And there's a point where he goes to her and reaches to her and says, "We're going home," and we see a change. And by the change, what we see is there is no body on the banks of the river. Pete Martell does not find a body. There is no Laura Palmer that shows up that night with Jacques and Leo. Now, I will say it does, and Ron Pulaski. It does make me wonder, though. I'm not completely buying into the idea that because Laura didn't show up at that point, um, things would suddenly be dramatically changed. I think there's still way too much stuff in play. I still think you have the Leland issue. If Sarah Palmer is who I think she is, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I think there's that. So I'm not, even right from the start, I'm not sure if anything was necessarily fixed or slightly delayed. But again, there's tons of questions moving forward, but just something I wanted to bring up. Um, we see Sarah Palmer, and something that about Sarah Palmer is that there's just been this quiet, numb sense of dread and evil about her. We saw with the exchange with the guy. I was going to curse, I'm not going to. With the guy at the bar, and what she did to him. But even in that sense, you don't really blame her for what she did. But we see at this time, there have been a number of times where we've heard strange noises and sounds coming from Sarah Palmer's house. In this instance, I think we see things kind of torn like right open, where Sarah Palmer is just stabbing, gouging, and punching it away at a picture of Laura Palmer. My 10-cent evaluation on this is, and somebody had asked this before too, my sense is that Sarah Palmer is Judy. Laura Palmer is a representation against and fight against Judy, with Coop being the ultimate good. And I think in that regards, it makes everything that's happened in the past a lot more disturbing. But that's my 10-cent. That's going to change. It's going to ebb and flow. I'm sure somebody's going to tell me I'm crazy for saying that. But that's what I'm going with now. But again, a couple more rewatches I need to do on some of the episodes. So Cooper used to he used that seed, which we kind of knew he was going to use in his hair to create a version of himself. I thought it was sweet that he did use it to create a version of Cooper to send back to Janie and her son. It struck me very much like Doctor Who. Yeah, I'm pulling my geek card here for a second with regards to what happened with the Ninth Doctor. Ninth Doctor, right? Yeah, make sure I got my numbers right. Um, so yeah, David Tennant. I'm not apologizing. Yeah, okay, if I was wrong. But in that regards, it kind of gave Rose the doctor person to be with. So that's kind of how I took that too. Not that I have a problem with it. I thought it was nice. But I kind of had a gut feeling that's where that was going. Um, uh, is it the story of the little girl who lived down the lane? It's interesting the way that quote was used by the arm, and it's also a line that was used in exchange, including involving Audrey, who, again, by the way, we have no idea what happened with her, what's going on with her, which it burns me a little bit and starts touching upon my whole thing with David Lynch and how women are represented in the series. That's definitely going to be its own post. I don't want to try and just cram that into one of these because on so many levels, if you take it even just beyond the violence, if you take it just the way certain characters are even handled, the whole Norma thing, I could go off in 10 minutes just for that. But I think it's an interesting premise. I wish we had gotten to know a little more that was going on with Audrey. But I found it very interesting similarities in those lines. Um, Coop, he ends up encountering Mike and the Arm before meeting up with Leland Palmer, who again urges him to find Laura. Cooper finds Diane instead, and again, what we see is when they find each other, they find themselves deposited in the woods, and next thing you know, they're in a pickup truck. They're in a pickup truck along where there are major high voltage lines where electricity is the strongest. Electricity, obviously, not just being the fire of modern time, but also a form of transportation, not just around, but between alternate realities, which we're about to find out. We see that they, at the marker 4:30, they shift to a new dimension, and before that happens, Diane and Cooper kiss. I think it's out of loving, it's out of longing, and I think it's out of something that Cooper says. Once we cross, it could all be different, and it turns out for one of them, it is. Um, the motel that they end up staying at, Cooper and Diane end up having sex. It's odd. It seems very off. It doesn't seem very passionate. There are instances where she's just covering his face. So we get a sense that something isn't quite right, and we find out why. Because in this dimension, Cooper is now Richard, and Diane is now Linda, and Diane is living the Linda life now in this new dimension. It was different. She's moved on to a different life. Cooper is Richard, but Cooper still has an understanding of himself. And he knows in this reality of where he's at, besides letting Diane go, the idea of another instance of killing two birds with one stone, he's also there to get Laura, to find Laura and bring Laura back. Um, he ends up stopping at a Eat at Judy's coffee shop. Right, should know. There was just not a good sign when we saw that. Not a good sign in any way, shape, or form. Again, the diner with the name of the person or thing or entity, what are you going to call it, representing all evil. Yeah, that's never good. Never good. Um, Cooper starting to act a lot more like Doppelcoop, which I found was interesting. And what I mean is, in the way he handled the sex scene with Diane, but more importantly, when he was in the diner, the way he coldly took care of those guys. But on top of that, I think it was also the matter of the way he kept waving the gun around, and the way he deep fried the weapons, even the way he gave the warning. There wasn't that Cooper FBI type of good guy confidence swagger. It was much more ominous. And I thought there was a little bit of blending there that I'm wondering if there isn't a little doppelcoop stink still left on Cooper that maybe happens as he's traveling between dimensions. I don't know. We're not quite sure. I'm not sure we're going to know for a while. But again, I'll touch base on that in a second. Um, he ends up finding out the address for the waitress that he was looking for at the diner, and the waitress, his name is Carrie Page, turns out to be Laura Palmer. Cooper's able to convince Carrie that she is possibly Laura Palmer and to agree with him to go on a trip to Twin Peaks. Um, she's in a home where there's a guy with a bullet in his head, so she doesn't have quite a lot to lose. What I find interesting about that is it, Carrie Page, if Carrie Page is this dimensions or universe's Laura Palmer, it seems like Laura Palmer perpetually is finding herself in these situations. Um, and so Carrie Page really doesn't have much to lose, so she ends up traveling with Cooper, and it's a long trip, as you can imagine. There's an issue with headlights that are following them. Not quite sure what to read into that one. They were around for a while, and the fact that they were referenced, I'm wondering if this isn't one of those things, like with Laura looking past James, that 30 years down the road may mean something a lot more. A little bit of a red herring for future storylines, possibly. But I thought that was very interesting that they made note of that. Um, so they get to the Palmer house. So the owner of the Palmer house turns out not to know about Sarah Palmer or anything like that. They Cooper does ask who the past owners were. And if you're up on Firewalk with Me or up on Twin Peaks, go back and listen to her answers, because you'll be interested to know that those names are very familiar with names that are mentioned in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, specifically in regards to how Laura gets that painting. So something for you to tune back in and listen to and see if you can catch those names that you're referencing. Okay. What we find is there's, at this point, little confusion. And Coop seems to not sure what's going on, and then he has this sudden panicked realization where he says, wait, what year is this? Now, I'm not quite sure what that could mean, because I don't know. I mean, if by year, I mean he's meaning more where and when as opposed to when, because year wouldn't make much of a difference, because you can tell by the setting of the place. But I think there may have been this sudden realization of something is wrong, and let me start asking questions. But by then, it's too late. We get the patented Laura Palmer blood-curdling scream. We get the lights going out. And next thing you know, we get at the scene of Laura whispering to Cooper in the Black Lodge again. But it's interesting because if you listen faintly, I don't know if she's necessarily speaking backwards, which I thought was interesting. And two, take a look at the look on Cooper's face. There is definitely a look of panic or concern, like something has gone wrong. My feeling being that Cooper thought it was going to be very easy, that I would just go back in time, I would be able to fix this Laura thing, and then I'll just bring Laura home from the alternate dimension where she's at, back to my dimension. But I don't think he's realizing what exactly his dimension is, or how you get back there, or more importantly, if Judy's just going to basically let him walk through the Black Lodge and take Laura out, because Laura is a special entity. And Laura is somebody, in all honesty, that Judy is not going to allow to have happiness. Not that it's not going to still try, not that you're not going to have a Cooper out there that's always going to make sure to make that happen, but I think this is a perpetual battle that's still going on. I don't know where that leaves our Twin Peaks timeline, and that's one of the things that kind of bothers me as a Twin Peaks fan. I respect Lynch as an artist, and I'll be talking about this in future posts, but I also respect, I would have to say what I feel is Mark Frost's involvement, which also continues to give us some type of linear storyline with the characters that we love. So I want to be addressing that from two different perspectives. What I thought about the finale, what I thought about the series overall. I thought as Lynch art, I thought it was amazing. As a Twin Peaks fan who was looking for the story and the world that I've gotten hooked on and waited 27 years for, jury's still out on this. There are a lot of things I still have to consider. Just for note, that doesn't mean that somehow I don't get it or I don't understand. I just think there are just certain different expectations I may have had being a Twin Peaks fan as opposed to what I was expecting as a Lynch fan. But that's it, folks. I want to thank you guys for joining me all along for these. Hope you check out my future posts on Twin Peaks. Hoping we don't have to wait to 2044 before we get more Twin Peaks. And like I said, please make it a point of joining me. I think we've got on Monday, tomorrow after we'll be seeing this, we have Preacher. We're going to be doing a live blog of the season finale. And on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, we're going to be doing American Horror Story live blog on FX. And don't forget, Preacher is going to be on AMC. Thanks a lot, folks. See you live blogging around. Take care.